Welcome. This is the Ag Engineering Podcast, where we talk tools, tips, and techniques to improve the sustainability of your farm. I am your host, Andy Chamberlain from the University of Vermont Extension, and this podcast is supported by Northeast SARE, providing grants and education to advance innovation in sustainable agriculture. We're trying to improve the industry by chatting with farmers and getting their input on tools, tips, or techniques that have changed the way they farm for good. Many of these practices affect multiple areas of the farm. Whether it be environmentally, emotionally, physically, or financially, we share the knowledge to promote sustainable agriculture, lifestyle, and business. Thanks for having a listen. Now, let's get started.
Yeah, so even though we're up in zone 4, we're many beds, we're getting 5 crops on a bed, but we definitely average over 3 for every bed on the farm. So that's a lot of bed flip.
It is a lot of flipping.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're good at that.
You could almost look at it as if you're doing 3 crops per season per bed, like you're farming on 3 acres.
Yeah. There you go.
It's just all in how you think about it.
And paper pot, the paper pot transplanter has really revolutionized how much we're planting and how quick we can flip and, how big our seedlings are going in and how fast they're going in. And Evan and I transplant together as a team to make it faster, and we've gotten really, really efficient. And so we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah. I think that's probably moved us from averaging 3 to averaging, closer to 4, per season, because that paper pot allows you to take advantage of a short time window.
Today's episode comes to you from Barnet, Vermont, where we meet with Heidi Choate and Evan Perkins of Small Axe Farm. Together, they've got 20 years agricultural experience and 11 years in this business. They are growing on an acre of production, which includes about 1/8 of an acre in both high tunnels and caterpillar tunnels. They sell primarily to a retail wholesale markets, with 10% going to CSA or custom orders. Their sales this last year was about $115,000 gross, and they utilize about 2.5 FTEs. Heidi and Evan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us on.
Thanks.
So I just set the stage a little bit about your farm, but if you could just describe what you do in one sentence, what would you say?
We have a 1 acre no-till market garden on our off-grid homestead, and that's how we make our living.
So you're big users of the paper pot transplanter. How long have you been using that in your systems?
I think, I guess 3 seasons ago we borrowed it in the fall from another farm just to test it out. And so we've kind of used it. Yeah, we used it that first fall, and then we used it the next season, but that was the year when it was going to be disallowed for organic production. So we didn't use it fully the second year because we didn't want to invest in cases of new paper pots. We weren't sure what was going to happen with it, even though we were legal to use it that whole season. And then when it got, re-allowed for organic production, this year was the first year we were able to, we just fully implemented it. We really learned a lot that first couple months, because it was like the mindset of it, I just fit right in with our farm. We already planted seedlings for lots of different things, and our minds were always about how fast can we get a crop in and out. And so it was really easy to adapt that tool to a biointensive system where you're flipping beds all the time. And so, but this year was really the first year where we really utilized it to its full extent, because we weren't worried about it, finding it. We just invested in all the paper pots. So we used it as much as we wanted, basically. So
how much did we had calculated how quickly and how much we could, because it's so fast. What did we calculate that
yeah,
day?
I don't know. You can do, anybody who's used it knows, but I think one day we planted over 7,000 seedlings in about an hour or something like that.
It was crazy.
Together.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really if you do team planting, 2 people, you can use 3 as well, but with 2 people, you can pretty much just keep that machine running. You keep that little cart running, so it's really fast to get seedlings in.
So 2 people planting, teamwork. Who's doing what? How's that work?
I'm running. I'm running
so
trays.
Okay, so we got one person running the machine and then the other person running the plants.
Yeah.
Yep.
On our, because of the hillside here, it's particularly tricky ground to paper pot transplant into, because the beds are sloped, and especially if you're on the downhill edge of the bed, the cart can slip off down into the pathway. So all of our employees use the paper pot transplanter, but if you know how to use it well on the hillside and the beds, you can be like 5 times as fast pulling it. So typically that was, I did it more often than not this year. But again, that will change, but it's a really high value hand skill. So it's the kind of thing that we're hoping to have a longer term multi-year employee that we can afford to pay a lot more, because they're going to have that skill down, which is very skilled labor to do that fast.
Yeah, if they can do it 5 times as fast. Then
and
that's
I think
gains.
I think we really got it wired, even to Evan gets to the end of the bed, he starts to turn, I'm grabbing the tray, I'm stepping to one side, he's stepping to the other, he's getting it ready, I'm grabbing the next tray. Even we got it down to such a science, just so that it was really efficient. We weren't getting in each other's way, and we could be quick, and we would do the same thing every time. And to transfer that to employees we can do it. We just haven't really
teach
spent
them the choreographed
Yeah,
dance.
it really was choreographed.
Yeah, we did that a lot. And the second person can be trained pretty quickly. It's just pulling the cart, particularly on our slope beds, which is a challenge, because you actually have to, if you're going to move fast, you actually have to hold weird pressure on it.
Yep.
It's not a straightforward thing.
Push down and up, pull up and
At
push
the same
down.
time.
And
Yes.
And in a pinch, one of us is doing it on our own, usually Evan, but it is great when there's 2 of us.
Yeah.
So do you lay out the plants ahead of time in a certain order?
Yeah, we'll put a few, whatever we need on one end and whatever we need on the other end, and so that there's always a tray there ready, because we know how many rows it's going to take, and yeah.
In our bed length is it just happened to be our 45-foot beds, which is our standard, are about the length of a paper pot tray. I think they're 44 feet. It varies, but then the 6-inch trays, you can do 3 44-foot.
See, that's why we didn't make them 50 feet long.
Yeah. Now we know.
Now we know why we did that.
Yeah.
You were just ahead of the time.
That's right.
Yeah. So we tend to have very little waste. We'll have usually a little bit of extra, just because some of the beds are a little shorter or something like that, and then we'll use those to plug in if there was poor germination in the tray. So yeah, I think that's been the paper pot transplanter. It allows us to get things like radishes in maybe like a 15-day window. Sometimes in midsummer, they might only be in the ground for 15 days. And that's pretty amazing if you just have that short window where it's the end of July, and you need to plant a fall crop there that's got to go in by the mid-August or the last week in August. You can safely plant paper pot, either greens or radishes in there, and know you're going to get a full harvest off that bed.
It seems like some crops just really thrive in the paper pot trays.
Yeah.
I feel like the radish in particular just does super well.
Yeah, I think I think in general it's just a skilled labor tool, though. You have to manage your seedlings better. They're prone to drying out. The trays, the seedlings are prone to drying out in the ground after you've planted them, and you have a short window with certain crops where it can be planted where it's going to do well. Radish only does well if it's at a certain growth stage. If it's too small, it'll probably do fine, but if it's too big, it's not going to work. It's going to, you're going to have poor quality radishes. And that goes the same for beets, salad turnips, all that kind of stuff. So that makes a particularly great tool for a small farmer, because small farmers tend to be, they're farming smaller land, and they tend to have the time to develop those better skills with that.
Some people who said that they kind of love and hate it have challenging soils. Sounds like you have a pretty good soil that works for this system.
Yeah, and it even works really well in our no-till system. Like, just running the tilther down is enough in our soil. Like, if we've cut off like big broccoli stems and the root balls in, that's not going to work. If we're going to know we're paper potting next, we'll probably pull those instead of leave them in the soil. But there's a lot of crops that we can cut right off with a brush cutter or snip off of the soil, and still, after a pass with a tilther, paper pot transplant in it effectively.
Do you have to tilt pretty heavily, or just
It's one pass.
Yeah.
But we use a larger, like 20-volt DeWalt hammer drill on it. So that tool is really different depending on what drill you put on it. So with that larger 20-volt drill, it runs. We used to run it with an old 36-volt drill, and it was a very powerful tool at that point. Just because we found the regular kind of standard 18-volt tools that were the standard for a long time were just they ran it fine, but not if you had to chop if you were going to chop anything. So yeah, that it works well with that, and we don't always have to use the tilther before we paper pot. But I think people with heavier clay soils and stuff where you get compaction on the surface, it can be a real challenge. I think people also sometimes have challenge in deep compost mulch systems because certain kinds of compost will tend to dry out. And I actually did have that experience this year with one bed that I was deep compost mulching for weed pressure. So I think it works. It's a better tool if you're doing a no-till in a style where you're not using deep compost mulch, or you're using a finer grade of compost that holds moisture better at the surface.
Do you have rocks at all on your hills?
Little ones.
Yeah, mostly little
Lots
ones.
of them.
Yeah, but it's not terrible. We
Yeah,
used to
it's
farm in New Hampshire, and but we consider it no rocks.
Yeah.
Because like in New Hampshire, it was like the glacier had just come through the day before.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there are rocks, but we are the beneficiaries of settlers who settled this land in 1780 and they got steep land in their land grant, and they cleared this steep hillside because the soil was good, and they took all the big rocks out. So that's why there aren't rocks here. Otherwise, there'd be rocks there.
Right.
Yeah.
There's motivated farmers before you
It's
on
not
the
like,
land.
yeah, there's big stone walls around the edges of all the fields
Yeah.
that are, slowly collapsing. But yeah. And rocks present an issue with the paper pot transplanter, so you just kind of have to take them out. But
We do it constantly. Yeah, we're just
Yeah.
as we're doing other things, we're tossing rocks.
When we started using the tilther, and we switched from we used to like prep the tops of our bed with a wheel hoe and a rake, and we still do sometimes. But when we switched over to the tilther, we made a conscious effort to remove all those walnut-sized rocks out, which are kind of like the main things that will get those tools. We'd always moved the bigger rocks, but we'd left a certain level of rock in there because it didn't actually interfere with our farming system at all.
Right.
But then as we started using these mechanized tools that can jam, then
Yep,
all right, now we're
Had to screen a little smaller.
Yeah.
Yep. And so since we live on a hillside, it's pretty easy to take the rocks and just throw them into the woods, and that's what we do.
Yeah.
So the woods are full of rocks. Yeah.
What'd you spend on the paper pot, and do you think that paid for itself? How fast?
Yes, I do think it's paid for itself. I think we bought the starter kit from Paper Pot Co., which for us was perfect because it came with a case of each size, and those cases of paper pot trays are expensive, several $100s a piece. A case of each size of those, the transplanter, a drop seeder, and enough spreader bars and racks so that you could do like 5 trays at once, which is a good number. So that you're not, if you just buy one of those units, you can only seed one or fill one tray with soil at once. Yeah, it was a pretty good kit, and we used all of those things that came in the kit, and it was a pretty significant savings. So again, it was a big purchase for us, and especially that year we had bought it, that was the year that after we had bought it, and we talked to NOFA about it, and they're like, well, it's probably gonna be a long time before they do anything on it. We're like, all right, well, if we can use this for a couple of years, it'll be worth it. And then like 3 months later, they're like, well, it's banned, but you can use it for the end of the season. So,
Was it 3,000 or 4?
It was 3.
3
Yeah, it was
for
around
that kit.
Yeah, it was around 3 for that. And there's other places to buy it. That was kind of the best deal we found because there was no shipping on it and stuff.
Any modifications or kind of, you've mentioned a few nuanced things, but are there any changes you wished that you have made or you wish that should be done to it?
Well, I think there's certainly a lot of room to move with that tool in terms of getting larger size cells, because it's 264 cells per tray, which is like a standard Japanese tray, which is bigger than a standard 1020 tray. It's a little longer, a little wider. So that precludes a lot of seedlings, which just need to grow bigger. They do, I guess that just recently they do have deeper trays that just became available, but I haven't actually seen them advertised yet. But I think they've always had those in Japan, but they were never available here. They were the same cell size, but they're deeper, which will really help for maybe even be able to use them successfully for carrots, which is really marginal right now. You can use them, but you have to hit it perfect, which we have pretty much never done. You have to hit the carrot size just right. But with the deeper cell, you may be able to do carrots and things like that with them, or just have a little more leeway to let your small, fast-growing brassicas get a little bigger in them. So there's a lot of room to move there to make the tool better.
I think a kickstand.
Yep, people put kickstands on their things.
I've seen people do it, but
Yeah.
that would be great, well, especially for the hill, but
Yeah.
for anyone, I think
Extra
it's,
long one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When that tray falls off your paper pot planter by accident, it's,
Yeah. The problem with
can
our
hand
hill
plant
is
it,
that,
but
we
yeah.
need 2 kickstands.
Yeah, I guess.
An extra log to
Stabilizer
make up for
feet.
the slope.
Yeah. But yes, that can be a disadvantage. And I don't think it's fixable, but just because of the small cell size and because the paper on the edges, like you need to pay more attention to watering when you're growing the seedlings. And when we plant them out into the ground, depending on the crop, we'll often put shade cloth over them. If it's going to be like hot and sunny, we'll put shade cloth over them
hoops,
for the first week, just because I think that's probably one of the main complaints a lot of farmers have with them is that they'll lose the seedlings in the field because they're growing in this small little soil block, and it's going to take longer because there's paper walls on that block. It's going to take longer for those roots to get into the soil and be able to uptake water. So under good conditions, a regular seedling, maybe after 3 days, is starting to uptake water from the soil pretty okay. But the paper pot is definitely 5 or 6 days that you need to, like that first week, you need to just be on it in terms of water, and the shade cloth really helps with that.
So if you're adding hoops and shade cloth, that sounds like an added step that you wouldn't have needed to do before.
It is shade cloth. You don't need to add that many hoops for shade cloth like per bed because it doesn't require a lot of support, and shade cloth is like, compared to working with row cover, is like a dream. So for us, that really doesn't feel like work, and especially knowing that we're gonna have to water less. That's kind of a break-even proposition with the shade cloth for us, and shade cloth doesn't blow away in the wind. So compared to all the other covers we use, we think shade cloth's amazing.
And all the time we save not hand transplanting that, we're happy to use that time elsewhere, a little bit of that time elsewhere.
Right.
Yeah. But shade cloth's expensive, but it does last a long time, and
Yes,
it's very easy to work with compared to all the other covers. I think one thing that is really, really nice about it is that the drop seeder is fairly affordable. And so that really saves up if you don't already own a vacuum seeder, or the drop seeder is a pretty affordable way to get into just seeding trays really fast. It doesn't work I find it doesn't work for the smallest brassica seeds. So you can't singulate broccoli seed or anything like that with it. So if we're doing like broccoli or kale, which we sometimes will do, we'll hand transplant that. But it works fine for if we're doing, say, Asian salad greens. Those are small seeds, but we want
Multiple.
Yeah, we want 7 or 8 seeds per cell, so that the drop seeder works fine for that.
But not bok choy.
But yeah, bok choy you got to do by hand.
Yeah.
So that we find really helpful with it. That drop seeder also works really well for planting microgreens for us, and the paper pot trays work really well for the smaller brassica microgreens. So there's double purpose there. We would even starting from scratch probably buy those really durable paper pot trays and the drop seeder just for doing microgreens for the amount of time it saves with the seeding. So yeah, I think those are some advantages to it. One thing that we do with the drop seeder is sometimes you can tape off a pattern, so you can plant seeds every other cell. So if you want 12-inch spacing, you can use the 6-inch trays and get 12-inch spacing. Or what we'll most commonly do with brassicas, say for early broccoli, we'll plant every other cell with broccoli, and then the intervening ones with bok choy. And then when that bok choy gets big, usually baby bok choy, will cut all that baby bok choy out, and then the broccoli will be spaced perfectly. And we can do that and you can tape off the drop seeder and do it with the drop seeder. It doesn't work for those two crops because they have small seeds. But if you wanted to interplant radishes in with something, that would work.
Creative.
Yeah. So it's pretty versatile that way. And we do use it for things like kale and broccoli. You're growing a smaller size seedling, but there's a certain time of year where a smaller sized seedling works well. You just have to protect it more when you get it out into the field. And then we'll do the same thing. Maybe we'll do 2 rows of kale, but there'll be 3 rows of bok choy baby bok choy in that bed at the same time, just planted separately. And then we'll just thin that right out. And it's really fast to do that interplanting with the paper pot trays. So those are other ways that we've used it to, made it more versatile for us.
And when we'll plant kale, and then we'll fully take every other plant, and we'll just take that plant right out at 6-inch spacing.
Yeah, we'll do that in the springtime, and we'll just sell that whole kale plant as
just an extra
as early kale, and then we'll thin it out. So we've got all kinds of systems like that, so that we can plant more stuff.
We get a lot out of those beds.
Yeah, with a paper pot, and it's hard to sell kale in the summer around here, but it's easy in the spring.
Everybody loves kale in the spring.
Yeah, yeah. So those are some things that we use to kind of like maximize the benefits of it. There's more to learn too, I think. And yeah, we just really like that versatility of being able, and we will interplant scallions with cilantro and things like that. And it's just super easy with that tray. And it makes spacing really easy for employees too. Just like, it's one less skill you have to teach them.
Yeah.
Because it spaces
a little bit more automated.
Yeah, it's a little bit more automated, and we definitely like both of our full-time employees use the paper pot transplanter, and you can train them on them. It's just more like it's going to take them a while to be fast with it, but even if they're using it slowly, it's still good.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts on the paper pot transplanter. A lot of little tips and tricks and nuanced things there. That's awesome to share. If people want to reach out with questions or follow along with what you're doing, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, we have an Instagram page, Small Axe Farm.
And we have a Facebook page, and we have a website, which is just smallxfarm.com.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for being on the show, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you go ahead and subscribe, share this with a friend, or leave us a comment. And if you want more information, check out the show notes on our website at agengpodcast.com. That's agengpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. I hope you have a great day.
The proceeding has been a production of University of Vermont Extension. For more information on Extension, log on to www.uvm.edu/extension.